I'm 62 years old, I tried everything, and today I'm ashamed to look at myself in the mirror. There is a moment that happens, if you live long enough and struggle hard enough, where you find yourself standing in front of a mirror and not quite recognizing the person looking back at you. Not because of the age in your face, though the age is there, written in the lines and the grey and the particular tiredness that settles into a face that has carried a lot for a long time. Not because of how you look, because of what you see. Because of the distance between the person you are looking at and the person you believed, somewhere along the way, you are going to become. That distance, when you finally let yourself measure it honestly, is one of the most painful things a human being can experience. And I have been standing in front of that mirror, metaphorically and literally, for years now, measuring that distance and carrying the weight of what it tells me. I am 62 years old. I have tried everything, and I am ashamed of what I see. I want to say that clearly, without softening it, because for too long I have been softening it, wrapping it in qualifications and half-truths, and the particular language of a person who is not quite ready to look at his own life directly. I have tried every version of this conversation with myself, where I come out looking less bad, where the circumstances explain enough and the effort accounts for enough and the bad luck covers enough, that what remains is manageable, is livable, is something I can present to myself without flinching. Those versions exist and they contain real truth, but they are not the whole truth. The whole truth is harder than that. The whole truth is that I'm 62 years old and I have nothing to show for 62 years of trying. No home, no savings, no retirement, no career that produced anything I can point to with pride, no financial legacy for the people I love. Nothing, in the concrete material sense that this world uses to measure whether a life has amounted to something, that I can hold up as evidence that the trying meant anything. That is the whole truth. And I'm saying it out loud today because I believe that the not saying it, the silence around it, the careful performance of someone who has it more together than he does, has cost me more than the situation itself. The silence keeps you alone with it. And alone with it, you cannot do anything except carry it. And carrying it at 62 has become something I can no longer sustain without at least having the honesty of acknowledging what I am carrying. I want to start at the beginning, because the beginning matters and because I think people who have not lived a life like mine sometimes imagine that the people who end up where I have ended up made some obvious catastrophic choice early on that set everything in motion. A clear mistake, a clear turning point, a clear moment where the road forked and the wrong path was chosen. It was not like that. It was never like that. The beginning of my story is not dramatic. It is ordinary in a way that is, I think, part of what makes it so hard to talk about. Because ordinary failure, failure that accumulates slowly and without drama over decades of genuine effort, does not have the narrative clarity of a spectacular disaster. It just has the weight. I grew up without much. Not in poverty exactly, not in the way that word gets used to describe the most extreme deprivation, but without margin, without cushion, without the kind of financial foundation that gives a young person options. My family worked. Everyone worked. Working was not a value that was discussed or celebrated in my house because it did not need to be. It was simply what you did. You worked because not working was not a real option, and because the alternative to working was something nobody wanted to think about too clearly. I absorbed that completely. I absorbed it so completely that the capacity for hard work became one of the things I was most sure of about myself, one of the few things I could always count on when other things were uncertain. Whatever else I might not have, I had the willingness to work. I could always count on that. What I could not count on, as it turned out, was that the willingness to work would be sufficient. That working hard, working consistently, working through difficulty and discouragement, and the grinding repetitiveness of jobs that took everything from your body and gave back the minimum they could justify, would produce the outcomes that the working was supposed to produce. Security, stability, something built, something owned, something that would still be there when the working eventually had to stop. I could not count on that, and the realization that I could not count on it came so slowly, arrived in such small increments over such a long period of time, that I never had the clear, single moment of understanding that might have prompted a decisive change. Instead, I had years. decades of years, of trying and falling short, and telling myself it was temporary and trying again in a different direction, and falling short again and trying again. I have had more jobs than I can count with any precision. That is not an exaggeration. I genuinely could not give you an accurate number. I worked in construction, in warehouses, in restaurants, in retail, in cleaning, in delivery, in security, in whatever was available in whatever season of my life I happened to be in. I was not a job hopper, in the way that word is used to suggest instability or lack of commitment. I was a person whose economic circumstances required adaptability, whose employment history reflects not a lack of focus, but the specific reality of a working life, lived in the parts of the economy that do not offer the kind of stability that allows you to stay in one place and build something over time. When a job ended, I found another. When that ended, I found another. I was always working. The continuity was not in the employer or the industry. The continuity was in the showing up, and the showing up was real. I want that to be understood. The effort was genuine. There was no period in my life where I stopped trying, where I gave up and accepted whatever came. Even in the darkest years, even in the years when the gap between what I was doing and what I felt I should have been doing was widest and most painful, I kept trying. I tried new things when the old things were not working. I looked for angles I had not tried, opportunities I had not pursued, ways of making something work that had not occurred to me before. I tried. That is the thing that makes the current situation most difficult to sit with. Not that I did not try. I tried everything. The trying just did not produce what trying was supposed to produce. And at 62, looking at the results of a lifetime of trying, the question that sits in the silence of my worst moments is the question I have never been able to answer satisfactorily. If I tried this hard for this long, and this is where I ended up, what does that say? Let me tell you about the moment, the specific moment that I keep coming back to, the one that cracked something open in me that has not fully closed since. It was about 18 months ago. A Thursday afternoon in late autumn, the kind of day that is grey without being dramatic about it, overcast and still, and the particular kind of cold that gets into things without quite being cold enough to make a scene about. I had been between jobs for 6 weeks at that point, not unemployed in a catastrophic way. I had some income from occasional work, enough to keep the basic things covered, barely, in the way that barely had become the permanent descriptor of my financial situation. But without the structure of regular work, without the organizing principle of a schedule and a place to be, the days had a quality to them that I was struggling to manage. I went to a grocery store that afternoon to pick up a few things. Not the grocery store I usually went to, which was cheaper and further away. This one was closer, and I did not feel like driving. I walked the aisles with the specific arithmetic of a person who knows exactly what they can spend and navigates the store with that number running constantly in the background. I had been doing this calculation for so long, it was automatic, as natural and unconscious as breathing. I put things in the basket, put some back, made the adjustments, arrived at the register with what I needed, and a number I was reasonably confident about. The card declined. Not because there was nothing in the account, because there was less than I thought, because a bill I had forgotten about had cleared that morning and taken the margin I thought I had. The amount I was short was $11. $11. I stood at that register in that grocery store, and I was $11 short of being able to buy food for the next few days, and I was 61 years old, and there was a line of people behind me, and the cashier was looking at me with a professional kindness that was somehow worse than impatience would have been, and I felt something happen in my chest that was not quite any of the emotions I had a name for. It was bigger than embarrassment, and smaller than grief, and it had a quality to it that I recognized after a moment as the feeling of a person who has finally run out of the distance they needed between themselves and the full truth of their situation. I put some things back. I paid for what was left. What? I walked to my car and I sat in it for a long time without starting it, and I thought about the 61 years that had led to that $11 moment, and I did not have a thought that resolved anything or explained anything or made anything better. I just had the weight of it. The full, unobstructed, no longer deniable weight of where I was and how I had gotten there, and what I did not have at an age when I should have had something, should have had enough, should have been past the $11 grocery store moment by several decades and several lives. I sat there until the cold got into the car, and then I drove home, and I did not tell anyone what had happened, and I did not tell anyone for a very long time after that. Until now. Until this. I want to talk about the mirror thing, because I mentioned it at the beginning, and it is not just a figure of speech. There is a literal mirror in my bathroom, an ordinary mirror, the kind that comes with a rental apartment that you did not choose and would not have chosen. And I have a complicated relationship with it that has developed over years. Not because I am vain. I have never been particularly vain. The complication is not about appearance. It is about what the face in the mirror represents to me, about the conversation that happens when I look at it, the specific and uncharitable inventory that takes place automatically, the way my mind goes to the gap between what I see and what I expected to see at this age. Not in terms of looks, in terms of everything the face of a 62-year-old man is supposed to represent, the life behind it, the things built, the security earned, the person who has arrived somewhere worth arriving at. When I look at my face in that mirror, I see someone who is still, at 62, in transit, still in the process, still trying to get somewhere that the getting to keeps being deferred, and that is hard to look at. It has been hard to look at for a long time. The shame I feel when I look in that mirror is not simple. It has layers to it that I think are worth naming, because I suspect other people have versions of the same layered shame, and naming it sometimes helps. The first layer is the most obvious one, which is the shame of the financial situation itself. The absence of savings, the absence of property, the debt that has been a constant companion for so long, it feels like part of my identity. That layer is painful, but it is also the most external, the most connected to concrete circumstances, the most amenable to at least being understood, even when it cannot be immediately changed. The second layer is harder. It is the shame of the trying. The shame of a person who did not fail for lack of effort, but failed despite effort, which in some ways is more disorienting than failing because you did not try. If you did not try, there is an explanation. There is something you could have done differently. There is a clear counterfactual where things go better because you make different choices. But if you tried, if you genuinely tried, everything you could think of, in every direction available to you, and you still ended up here, then the failure is not located in the trying. And if it is not located in the trying, where is it located? That question, the question of where the failure lives when the effort was real, is the question that makes the second layer of shame the most difficult to resolve. The third layer is the one I find hardest to talk about, which is the shame that comes from my family. Not the shame they make me feel. My family is complicated, like all families are complicated, and the ways they relate to my situation are not always comfortable to experience, but they have not been cruel, and they have not abandoned me. The shame I feel in relation to my family is mine. It is the shame of a person who wanted to give the people he loves more than he was able to give, who wanted to be the kind of family member who could help, who could provide, who could show up to occasions with something to contribute beyond just his presence, who wanted his children, if he had them, or his nieces and nephews, or whoever it is in his family who represents the next generation, to look at him and see evidence that hard work leads somewhere, that the example being set is one worth following. The shame of not being able to be that, of being in the family story, the cautionary tale rather than the inspiration. I know that my family has conversations about me that I am not part of. I know this not because anyone has told me directly, but because I am 62 years old, and I have been a perceptive person my entire life. And perceptive people eventually understand the shape of what is happening around them, even when it is not said explicitly. I know that my situation is discussed. I know that there is concern that has somewhere in it, underneath the genuine love and the genuine worry, a layer of something that feels uncomfortably close to the thing I see in the mirror. The sense of a life that did not go the way it should have. The specific discomfort of a family member who represents a version of things not working out. I am not resentful of this. Families talk. Families worry. Families carry their members in their conversations, even when the member is not in the room. But knowing that I am in those conversations in that way, as the subject of concern rather than the source of strength, adds something to the weight I carry that is distinct from everything else. Let me be honest about something that I have spent years being dishonest about, which is the role of my own choices in getting where I am. Because there is a version of this story that I have told myself and others where I am primarily a victim of circumstances, where the jobs were bad and the wages were low and the economy was difficult and the opportunities never materialized, and all of that is true and all of that is real and none of it is the complete story. The complete story includes choices I made that I can see now, from 62, with a clarity I did not have when I was making them, were not the right choices. Not dramatically wrong choices, not the choices of a reckless or irresponsible person, but choices that reflect, at various points in my life, a relationship with money and with planning and with the future that was not serving me. I spent money I should not have spent, at times when spending it felt necessary or justified, or like the only available response to the immediate pressure of the moment, and the spending produced short-term relief and long-term damage in proportions that I was not honest with myself about. I avoided dealing with debt when dealing with it early would have been much less costly than dealing with it late or not dealing with it at all. I did not educate myself about money, did not seek out information that was available, did not ask questions of people who might have had useful answers, because engaging with the financial reality felt like acknowledging the failure of it, and acknowledging the failure felt worse than maintaining the comfortable blur of not looking directly. I made those choices. They are part of the story. And owning them is part of what I mean when I say I am done with the versions of this story that let me off too easily. But owning my choices does not mean pretending they happened in a vacuum. They happened in the context of wages that were not sufficient for building anything, in a housing market that made ownership increasingly impossible for people with my income level, in an economy that has been systematically extracting more from working people while returning less for decades, in a culture that taught me that work ethic was sufficient and did not teach me that work ethic without financial education and structural support is often not sufficient at all. Both things are true. My choices matter, and my circumstances matter, and the honest story is the one that holds both without using either to cancel out the other. I want to talk about regret, because at 62, regret is a territory I spend more time in than I would like, and I think it deserves to be examined honestly rather than either indulged or suppressed. I have regrets. Real ones. The kind that have specific content, specific moments, specific junctions where I can see, looking back, that a different choice was available, and I did not take it. The job I did not apply for, because I talked myself out of believing I was qualified. The debt I did not address in my early 40s when addressing it was still relatively manageable, because I was afraid of what the addressing would reveal about the full extent of the problem. The conversations about money I did not have with the people close to me, because having them would have required admitting things I was not ready to admit. Those are real regrets, and they have real weight. But there is a version of regret that I have had to learn to resist, which is the version that is not really about specific choices, but about the whole arc of the life. The version that says, I should have been different. I should have been smarter, more disciplined, more strategic, more capable of doing what needed to be done when it needed to be done. That version of regret is not useful, not because it is entirely false, but because it is directed at a version of me that did not exist. The person I was at 30, at 40, at 50, was not a person who had access to the clarity I have at 62. He was doing what he could with what he knew in the circumstances he was in. He was trying. Telling him he should have been different is like telling someone who got lost in a forest that they should have known where they were going. The knowledge they needed to not get lost was not available to them when they needed it. The regret that says I should have known better is regret directed at ignorance, and ignorance is not a moral failing. It is just ignorance. The regret I try to work with is the forward-directed kind. Not what should I have done differently, which I cannot change, but what can I do differently now, which is the only question with any productive answer attached to it. And at 62, that question has a different quality to it than it would have had at 40. It is more urgent and more humble simultaneously. More urgent because the years available are fewer and the consequences of inaction are closer. More humble because I have been wrong before about what I was capable of. and I no longer carry the confidence of someone who believes his assessment of his own situation is accurate without testing it against reality. Let me talk about what trying everything actually means when I say it, because I think the phrase deserves more precision than it usually gets. When I say I tried everything, I do not mean I tried every possible thing that existed in the universe of possible things. I mean I tried everything I could see, everything that was visible to me from where I was standing, with the information I had, with the connections I had or did not have, with the specific constraints of my economic reality at each point in time. And that is an important distinction, because the things I did not try were often things I could not see, things that were not visible from where I was standing, things that existed in worlds I did not have access to or information about. I did not try investing, because investing was not a concept that had any practical reality in my daily existence. I did not try certain career paths, because those paths were not paths that anyone in my immediate world had walked or could show me how to walk. I did not try asking for help from certain people or institutions, because I did not know they existed, or did not understand what they offered, or was too ashamed to walk through the door, even when I knew it was there. This is not excuse-making. This is an attempt at accuracy. Because the gap between everything that exists and everything that was visible to me is a real gap, and the things that fell into that gap are part of the story of how I ended up where I am. And that gap is in large part a function of where I started. People who start with more resources, more connections, more exposure to the ways money and career and opportunity work, have a wider field of vision. They can see more options, because they have been shown more options, because the people around them have navigated those options, because the environment they grew up in modeled a broader range of possibilities. I started with a narrower field of vision, and I navigated within it as well as I knew how. What I could not do was navigate outside of what I could see. I am 62 years old, and I am still renting. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because it contains a kind of summary of the whole financial story that is more concentrated than anything else I could say. Still renting. After 62 years of life and 40+ years of working and all the effort and all the trying and all the years I told myself that at some point the renting would stop and the owning would begin. Still renting. The money I have paid in rent over my adult life, if I tried to calculate it, would represent a number that would make me physically ill to look at directly. Money that went somewhere that did not come back to me. Money that paid for the right to occupy a space that would never be mine, that would always belong to someone else, that could always be taken back. Decades of money paid for impermanence. And I am still paying it, still renting, still starting over every time the lease ends or the rent increases beyond what I can manage or something changes, and I have to find a new place and begin again in the way that a person who rents always has to begin again, without the anchor of something owned, without the stability of something that cannot be taken away. There is a particular loneliness in this that I think is hard to describe to people who have not lived it. Not just the financial loneliness of not having security, the existential loneliness of not having a place that is fully yours, of always being in some fundamental sense a guest in someone else's property, of not having the kind of rootedness that ownership provides, the sense of being planted somewhere, of having staked a claim to a piece of the world and made it yours. I have never had that. I have had addresses. I have had apartments and rooms and places where I lived for a while. But I have never had the thing you have when you own a place. And at 62, the likelihood that I will ever have it is something I have had to make an honest assessment of, and the honest assessment is not comfortable. I want to say something about the people who love me, because this story is not only my story, and they are part of it in ways that matter. I have people who love me, people who have stuck by me through decades of difficulty, who have seen the full picture of my life rather than the managed version, and who have not left. Those people are one of the few things I am unambiguously grateful for, without any complicated feelings attached. They are real, and their love is real, and it has cost them something to maintain it through the harder seasons, and I know that, and I carry it with the care it deserves. But loving someone and being uncomplicated about their situation are not the same thing. And the people who love me are not uncomplicated about my situation. They worry. They have conversations I am not part of. They look at me sometimes with an expression that is composed of love and concern, and something underneath those two things that I have learned to recognize over years of watching faces carefully. It is the expression of a person who is holding a sadness they do not want to show you. And that expression, however lovingly intended, however carefully managed, is one of the hardest things I encounter in my daily life. Because it reflects back to me not just my situation, but the impact of my situation on the people I love. And that impact, the ripple of my struggles into the lives of the people I care most about, is something I carry alongside everything else. I have a younger brother. He has done better than me financially, not spectacularly better, not in a way that makes us from different worlds, but measurably better. He owns a house. He has some savings. He has a retirement account that is not sufficient, but that is something that exists, that represents years of disciplined contribution that he made in ways that I did not. I am proud of him. I want to say that clearly, because it is true. I am genuinely proud of what he has built, and I am also, in moments that I am not proud of, envious in a way that shades into something uncomfortably close to shame. Not because he has more than me, because we started in the same place. We grew up in the same house, with the same parents, with the same resources or lack of them. And he built something, and I did not. And the fact that we started in the same place and arrived in different places means that the explanation for where I am cannot be entirely structural, cannot be entirely about circumstances beyond my control, because his circumstances were the same as mine, and he did something different with them. That is the hardest part. Harder than the abstract awareness that choices I made contributed to where I am. The concrete, specific, close-to-home evidence that the same starting point can produce different outcomes, that the same beginning does not determine the ending, that something was different in how we navigated the same road. I have spent a lot of time trying to understand what that difference was, not to assign blame or to retroactively judge either of us, but because understanding it feels important, feels like it might contain something useful for whatever time remains. What I have come to, tentatively and without complete conviction, is that the difference was partly behavioral, partly informational, and partly luck. My brother made some financial decisions earlier that compounded in his favor. He got some information at a critical time from a person who happened to be in his life that I did not have access to. And some things went his way in timing and circumstance that did not go my way. All three of those things were real. None of them tells the whole story. But together they produced a divergence that I have been living with for decades and that I am still living with now. I want to talk about what I am doing, because I think this conversation, to be honest, has to include not just the weight of where I am, but the direction I am trying to move in. Because I am not done. That is the thing I want to be clear about. I am 62 years old and I am tired in ways I have never been tired before, and the weight of what I am carrying is heavier than it has ever been, and I am not done. I have not accepted the current situation as the final situation. I have not decided that, because the past could not be changed, the future cannot be shaped. I have not given up, and I am saying that not as inspiration, but as fact, because giving up would be the one thing I would genuinely regret in a way I could not make peace with. What I am doing is small. I want to be honest about that because false hope is one of the most damaging things you can offer someone in a hard situation, and I have no interest in offering it. What I am doing is not going to transform my financial reality in the next 12 months. It is not going to produce the retirement I should have been building since my 30s. It is not going to close the gap between where I am and where I should be in any dramatic way. But it is real. And it is different from what I was doing before, and different from what I was doing before is the only movement available to me. I started with honesty. The kind of honesty I'm practicing here but applied privately, to myself, to my own numbers, to the actual state of my financial life, rather than the comfortable blur I had been maintaining. I looked at what I owe. I looked at what I earn. I looked at what I spend and where it goes and whether the going makes any sense or is just habit, just automatic, just the accumulated unconscious spending of a person who stopped asking whether what they were doing was what they actually chose to do. That looking was painful. It produced numbers that I would have preferred not to see in such sharp resolution, but it produced something else too, which was the specific, concrete, actionable information that is the only starting point for any real change. You cannot change what you cannot see. I have been unable to see clearly for years. Now I am looking, and the looking, even at painful things, is better than the alternative. I also started talking, not broadly, not to everyone, but to one person I trust completely, one person who has known me long enough to have the full context of my life, and who has the combination of love and honesty that makes a real conversation possible rather than just a sympathetic one. I told him everything. The grocery store moment, the numbers, the mirror, the shame, all of it, and what came back from that telling was not pity and was not judgment. It was the specific relief of being fully known and not abandoned for it, which is the thing the shame most wants you to believe is not available to you. The shame says, if they knew the full truth, they would think less of you. The shame is wrong. I told the full truth and was met with love and practical thinking and the offer of help that, for the first time in a very long time, I did not refuse. I am also trying, in a way that I have resisted for most of my life, to extend to myself something like the compassion I would extend to another person in my situation. This sounds simple, and it is not simple. It is actually one of the hardest things I have ever attempted, because the standard I hold myself to, the judgment I apply to my own history and my own results, is a standard I would never apply to another person. If someone I love told me the story I've been telling you, if they described the decades of trying and the absence of results and the weight of the shame and the grocery store moment, I would not look at them and think, failure. I would look at them and think, person, complex, trying, imperfect, carrying too much, deserving of something better than what they have been given and what they have given themselves. I would think that. I would feel that. I would mean it. And I cannot make myself extend the same to myself, not fully, not yet. But I am trying. And the trying, here as elsewhere, is real, even when the result is incomplete. I want to say something about the word shame one more time before I close, because I started with it and I want to end with it honestly rather than leaving it where it is. Shame is the voice that says you are not enough, that the distance between who you are and who you should be is evidence of something fundamental and unfixable about you, that the mirror shows you something worth being ashamed of. Shame is also, I have come to understand, a liar. Not a liar about the facts. The facts it points to are real. The debt is real. The absence of savings is real. The grocery store moment is real. Shame is not lying about the circumstances. Shame is lying about what the circumstances mean. Shame is taking a complicated contextual multiply-cause situation and reducing it to a verdict on a person's worth. And that reduction is not accurate, and it is not fair, and it does not serve anyone who is trying to actually do something about their situation rather than simply suffer inside it. I am 62 years old. I have tried everything I could see. I have worked harder than many people who have more than I do, and I have arrived at this point in my life without the things I wanted to have. That is the truth, the complete truth, the one that includes the context and the structural conditions and the choices I made and the information I did not have, and the luck that went against me at critical moments is more complicated than the shame wants it to be. And I am 62 years old, and I am still here and still trying and still capable of doing some things differently than I have done them, and still deserving in some fundamental way that has nothing to do with my bank balance or my lack of property or the line of jobs that did not add up to a career, of a life that is treated with dignity and told honestly and not hidden behind the performance of someone who has it more together than he does. I am done with the performance. I am done with the mirror conversation that only goes one direction. I am done with carrying this alone in the particular silence that shame requires. I am 62 years old, and I have tried everything, and some of it did not work, and I'm going to keep trying anyway, because the alternative, the giving up, the acceptance of the shame's verdict as the final word, is the one thing I am certain would make everything worse, and I have had enough of worse. If you are 60 or 55 or 48, and you recognized something in what I said, if the mirror thing landed, If the grocery store moment had a version in your own life that you have never told anyone about, I want you to sit with this. The shame is not the truth. It is a response to the truth, a deeply human and deeply understandable response, but it is not the truth itself. The truth is more complicated and more forgiving, and more full of possibility than the shame wants you to believe. And the possibility does not require you to be younger, or to have made different choices, or to have circumstances you do not have. It requires you to be honest and present and willing to look directly at your own life without flinching away, and to take one small step in a direction that is different from the direction you have been going. Just one, and then another, and then another after that. That is what I am doing, one step at a time at 62, with the mirror still complicated and the shame still present, but no longer in charge. No longer the last word, no longer the only voice in the room. I am still here. I am still trying. And today, saying all of this out loud for the first time, I feel something I have not felt in a very long time. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter than relief. Something closer to the feeling of setting something down that you have been carrying for so long you forgot you were carrying it. It does not weigh nothing, but it weighs less than it did an hour ago. And less, at 62, after everything, is enough to keep going.